Anyway, sorry, John, I thought you were Ken earlier. You've lost some weight. Anyway, crowd here. I can tell because Bill Pole's here. Anyway, I'll start by giving you some background on my family's relationship with the company and the people. My dad, George Chappelle, started work for Pelt in 1937. A friend of his, Clarence Dillwood, told him there was an opening at Pelt and he should go check it out. Applied and got a job as a janitor. Became a self-taught engineer, company pilot, vice president, and owner of the company. Never spent a day in an office in 43 years with the company. Spent most of his time in the plant, final assembly, making sure apparatus was up to snuff before delivery, and he delivered at least 80% of the trucks during his time there. And did the training on the engines and trucks. As for me, my first trip into that building was in 1947. At 1 year old, being pushed by my mom in a stroller. I became part of an extended family of about 30 new uncles and a few aunts. And that's really the way it was there. I went to work there in 1970 after 4 years in the Air Force. Worked every department except engineering, but mostly steel shop mechanics and final assembly. Later, I did the ladder truck deliveries and trained the firefighters and department mechanics on their new trucks. Going back about 100 years or so, there was a big problem around here with grain and pasture fires. Impossible to put out the hose and wet burlap sacks, which was the practice back then, and any rural structure fire was an automatic total loss. The fire at the time was O.Z. Bailey, and he was frustrated with all this stuff going on. And Oakdale already had a fire engine, but it didn't carry water, and relied on fire hydrants for water, and there was no such thing in rural Oakdale. O.Z. and Man got together and agreed something needed to be done, and they believed a truck could be built to carry water, hose, and pump to a fire. And I say Man, by the way, he became known as Man to everyone because he didn't want to be called Percy. P.E. was Percy Edward. He was very clear about that. Meetings were arranged with some of the local ranchers and going out on a limb. Sure, there was a Wilms and a rod in there. The chemical truck was discussed, but the ranchers said that they do about as much damage as fire, so that went out. It was decided that a water tank would be mounted on a truck chassis with a pump and hose. The idea being to get enough water to the fire fast enough, put it out in its early stages. Being a Dodge dealer, Van brought in a 1923 Graham Brothers chassis after passing the hat to pay for it. A Viking 25 to 50 gallon mounted pump was mounted on the left running board just after the driver. The pump being powered by an independent engine, the truck had a pump and roll capability. So the farm fire unit was born. There were still people around town who thought these guys were crazy. Short time after number one was built, there was a harvester fire that was put out by farm fire unit number one. Soon Waterford Fire Department showed up, Galt showed up, soon followed, each wanting a unit for themselves. After interest from other departments, Van realized they had something there and started producing farm fire units in the back of the Dodge dealership. Became Van Pelt fire trucks in 1925. A number of the farm fire units produced between 1923 and 25 is still debated by some people. Doesn't really matter. And the rural engines were still being called farm fire units in the early 30s. And I just found something this morning that I'm going to read. It's a first-hand account of a 17,000 acre fire out here by Clayton Wells when he was 10 years old.
Oh my gosh.
I've never seen this, and this has been in my stuff for years. Historians credit Oakdale's O.Z. Bailey and Percy Van Pelt with creating the nation's first wildland fire truck. Well, it was Bailey's push and Van Pelt's tinkering. It was really the fire of 1921 that ignited the need. Asked rancher Clayton Wells. It was July 5th. We were at my family's ranch right up in the mountains from where the fire broke out, Wells said, from his home in Oakdale. I was about 10 years old. Fire started at some church picnic on the north side of the Stanislaus between Oakdale and Knight's Ferry. The wind was blowing up again. Within hours, that fire jumped the river, jumped Highway 108, jumped Warnerville Road, jumped the Santa Fe Railroad tracks. It took out 17,500 acres, and there was nothing anyone could do. The city had one little truck with hand pumps. Firefighters tried to drive it across the range toward the blaze, broke an axle, and the fire nearly swallowed it whole. My cousin Billy Bob was on that truck and got badly burned, Wells says. That fire was moving so fast you couldn't outrun it with a horse, and all we had to fight it with was wet sacks, wet barley sacks that you would swat the fire with. That and back burning. I can remember my dad and my other cousin riding their horses as fast as they could, trying to cut the fences to set the cattle free. Bailey was fire chief in Oakdale, went to Van Pelt, who ran a Dodge dealership in town, and said, "Our ranchers need help. Can you rig up some sort of tank on a chassis?" It was a crude thing, but it worked, says Barry Chett of Oakdale, who married Van Pelt's granddaughter. It was a Dodge chassis with a tank that could pump 25 gallons a minute. Didn't have a red light, just a red flag. Anyway, I'm amazed that I never saw that before, a first-hand account. Anyway, an offshoot of this rural engine carrying water pump and hose to a fire was urban departments looking to have a city engine that could carry water pump and hose to attack a fire, while other engines that did not carry water connected to hydrants to continue the fight. It was kind of strange that an idea meant to support rural departments changed the way urban departments fight fire all over the country. Their next move was to move to a new building across the street from the dealership on 3rd Street. P.E. Van Pelt Marchetti Dodge Plymouth Chrysler was in what is now the Redwood Cafe. In 1936, the business had grown to 3 buildings with a workforce around 20 people. Apparatus changed a lot in the 40s with bigger tanks, higher capacity pumps, larger hose, more equipment, compartments. Required more horsepower and better brakes. So Van Pelt became a white truck dealer. Van Pelt became the largest user of white trucks by fire equipment builders in the U.S. And Oakdale City still has their 1946 white Van Pelt and Farm Fire Unit number 1. As pump capacities reached 1,250 to 1,500 gallons a minute, Diamond T Peterbilt Kenworth trucks with diesels came into favor. In 1947, a new plant was built by Cunningham Construction at Yosemite G. The only thing there now is a 100-foot flagpole and a plaque in memory of Van's son-in-law, Deb Dallas, and the company. I think I mentioned some of Van's accomplishments in the industry. He held patents for what he called the atom nozzle. Today we call it a fog nozzle. Also for the Van Pelt front mount pump, the 4-stage multi-fog pump, the electric pump primer, this sounds weird, the no-slop filler neck and cap. It prevented the water tank lid from being blown off if you're filling the tank under pressure, so it was kind of important. Then take hose and everything right out of the truck. Seen it happen. Growing up around Van as a kid, I had no idea he was so mechanically inclined. He was a car salesman after all. And his favorite line up till the day he died was, "I'm not a truck builder, I'm a car salesman." He turned the business over to son-in-law Nick Dallas in 1957, but kept his hand in for major decisions. Van Pelt got into the aerial business in 1958 using 50 or 65-foot Memco ladders on pumper chassis. 1960s, Van Pelt became a high ranger snorkel dealer using mostly 85-foot areas. And there's some pictures over there in that album I put together of one of the snorkels being used by my dad to install a new bell in the Methodist church tower. Those were handy things to have around. P.E. passed away in 1963. Tough time for all of us. In 1971, B.E. got into the heavy aerial business with the last Grove aerial produced before being bought out by Ladder Tower Incorporated in Lancaster, Pennsylvania. After many upgrades and models from 55 to 110 feet, it became Van Pelt's and later High-Tech's go-to aerial. As far as the engines were concerned, the most popular chassis in the 60s and 70s were Fords and Internationals. And Van Pelt added an extension to the back of many of the Fords to create seating for 3 more crew. Van Pelt was still missing something that kept him out of the running for bids in the big cities and counties. They were sold by Seagrave, Crown, and American LaFrance for the most part. 1959, my dad approached Van, and this is a true story. Said, "We need to build a custom chassis engine." What followed is the truth. Van replied, "What would it look like?" My dad took a broom and swept a large area inside the front door of the plant, got a handful of soapstone and drew it full size on the floor. Van walked around it a few times, looked up and said, "Build it." Try that nowadays. Bare frame rails were brought in along with Detroit diesel engine, Allison transmission, and all the other bits and pieces needed to build a chassis. A man named Dave Pitts took on that job and passed it on to my partner in High-Tech, Dan Marcioni, who built a number of them. The cab was built by hand, and after a number of them were built that way, and things got a little too expensive, they started using cabs built by Cincinnati Cab, and brought in bare bones and everything needed to complete it was added. They named the engine the Custom 300. And I'm pretty sure the name comes from the Chrysler 300, with Dan's feelings at the time. He was a Chrysler dealer by then, and he always drove a Chrysler himself. The Custom 300 was the major breakthrough for Van Pelt fire trucks since the plant fire unit in 1923. They were now in the conversation when it came to selling in places like LA City and County, Phoenix, Riverside County, Modesto, Anaheim, many more, and they sold a lot of them. I delivered 21 of them to LA myself. Some were engines and a number were sold with aerials installed. And then due to the high cost of liability insurance in 1978, the owners decided enough. Major owners had at least 40 years each in the business and sold out to self-insured FMC in December 78. July 1987, FMC moved the operation to Orlando, Florida to build fire engines in a plant alongside airline handling equipment. In 1990, they stopped building fire apparatus altogether. The Van Pelt name was never used in Florida. They had bought and buried the competition. The highest serial numbers to leave the Oakdale plant were for 2 engines for Auburn Fire Department. All told, around 3,700 were built. The last engine to physically leave the plant was a brush engine for Sparks, Nevada. And there's also a picture over there from the Oakdale leader with the Sparks engine sitting next to Oakdale's #1 farm fire unit, while all of us that were still there sitting all over them. And if you're wondering how far the Van Pelt brand reached, they were delivered to every county in California, as well as Oregon, Nevada, Utah, Arizona, Washington State, and Hawaii. My mother and dad delivered the Hawaiian engine in 1969 to, I think, not what Maui, but Hawaii anyway. And were told to stand aside while the Hawaiian firemen unloaded it from the ship and almost dropped it in the ocean.
Whoa.
Heard about that one a few times. Foreign sales were Liberia, Saudi Arabia, Philippines, and I delivered the Saudi engine to San Pedro, put on a ship, and the lettering on the doors in a big circle were Arabic, and in the center was crossed guns.
Oh.
And I got some books on the trip south. And the Liberian engine, sad story, had a 750-gallon water tank on it with a deck up top to walk on. Had 2 mounts for water cannons and 2 mounts for machine guns. They were like building out. Anyway, on a happier note, one door closed and another opened. 4 of us from Van Pelt, Dan Marshoni, Bob Parker, Ben Rusin, and myself decided what the hell else are we going to do. So high-tech fire apparatus was born. We found business people in Oakdale eager to help us keep the fire engine business going in Oakdale. We rented the Van Pelt building from the city of Oakdale until 1989, when we moved to our new building on Greer Street. Our intention at that time was to do fire equipment repairs, refurbs, and warranty work for good old FMC. That changed in 1989 when San Ramon Valley Fire showed up and asked us to continue building engines for them as we had done at Van Pelt. They kick-started the building of apparatus and high-tech. I could talk about FMC's reaction to that. Gotta be sour grapes. Oh, I could go on all night. I would not want us to do that. Let me just say, word got back to us from someone at FMC's Ivory Tower in Chicago that the bosses in their meetings were calling us the 4 Cowboys. In 1990, high-tech got an award from Governor Newt Mason as the best supporter of the local economy. And all I could say was, yeehaw, FMC.